Welcome to Learning Anatomy with Dr. Bakare. And if you are visiting my space for the first time, you are also highly welcome. In this lecture, we would be looking at the radius. Using this image by the side, this is the entire configuration of the upper limb. And this region that is carved out here in dotted yellow is the forearm region. Within the forearm region, we have two bony landmarks, and this includes the radius that is harrowed here in white. The radius is seen to be laterally placed. While at the medial side, we have the honor. I have put up a lecture on the honor. If you've not checked up that lecture, please kindly go and do so. But for the purpose of this class, we would be focusing on just the radius. It's one of the bones that are located or seen in the forearm region. It is seen to be located parallel to the honor. If you try to use this image by the side, this is the entire configuration of the bones located within the forearm region. And this region that is harrowed here in white is the honor, while on this other side here, that is harrowed here in yellow, we have the radius. You can see that the honor is located on the medial side, while the radius is located laterally. It is also important for us to state the specific positions of these two bones, even though they are located parallel to each other within the forearm region. It is also important for us to highlight that the radius opposes the honor. If you look at the radius, you see that it is shorter in terms of length, and this is what is projected here in this image. If you look at the honor on the other side, you see that it is longer than the radius. And this extension is created basically as a result of the projections that are seen at the upper region of the honor. And this includes the olecranon process and also the coronoid process. This is where we have the olecranon process at this posterior extension, while in the anterior extension here, we have the coronoid process. We've also described in details these two processes in our previous lecture on the honor. It is these extensions that create the increase in length of the honor, and this is why it tends to be longer than the radius. It is also seen to have a narrower proximal end. If you look at the proximal end of the radius, you see that it is narrower when compared with that of the honor. And this is what is harrowed in green. If you look at the honor on the other side, it is seen to be expanded. And this expansion is created for it to be able to accommodate the bones that are located at the upper region. And this is in the quest of creating the elbow joint. We know that the elbow joint is a complex type of joint, and it is created between the lower end of the humerus, specifically the trochlea, and also the trochlear notch of the honor. There is also a subset of the elbow joint that is also created by the head of the radius and also the capitulum. But if you look at the configuration of these two joints created by the radius and the honor, you see that that of the honor is larger when compared to the radius. This expansion of the honor is created for it to be able to accommodate the trochlear notch that is seen to be larger than the capitulum that is seen to be smaller, because it is the capitulum that accommodates the head of the radius. So you see that the upper end, the radius is narrower, while the distal end, it is broader. The radius is also broader at the lower end when compared with the honor. It is the radius that creates the expansion that will be accommodating the carpal bones. And this is why this expansion is so created at the lower end of the radius. You can see that the size of the two ends is based on the structures that will be connected to them. So now let's dive into highlighting the functions of the radius. The radius is what is harrowed here in white, and we say that it is one of the bones that are seen in the forearm region. And this is where it creates a bony background for the forearm. It is also seen to provide structural support and stability for the upper limb, because within the forearm region, it creates the platform onto which muscles and also ligaments will be lying upon. So it is seen to provide structural support and also stability for the upper limb, specifically the forearm region. It also creates site for the attachment of muscles and also ligaments. We'll also be highlighting more on this in a subsequent lecture on the muscular relations of the radius. And also, it is seen to be involved in the formation of joints. We'll be highlighting the different joints that the radius form as we go through with this lecture. And these joints are so created to allow for movement to occur. We know that joints are created when two or more bones are connected together. And it is at this point that movements are exerted or are allowed. So these are the functions. You can also add to this list in the comment section, and I'll be looking forward to it. So now let's drive through the joints that are formed by the radius. We already described in our previous slide when we try to highlight the functions of the radius that it is seen to contribute to the formation of joints. So it is seen to form joints at the proximal end and also at its distal end. If we try to use this image by the side, this is where we have the joint created here at the proximal region. And at the distal region, this is where we also have a number of joints, of course, created at this lower end. So at the proximal end, it is seen to create two joints. One of these joints is the humeroradial joint. This humeroradial joint is part of the elbow joint. Remember, we previously described that the elbow joint is a complex type of joint. Of course, it has subjoints within it. So one of the joints that constitutes the elbow joint is the humeroradial joint. As I've always said on this channel, is for us to always break down the name. If you break down this name, you see that this joint exists between the lower end of the humerus and also the proximal end of the radius. So if you look at this region that is arrowed here in white, this is where we have the humeroradial joint, where this joint is created between the capitulum of the humerus and also the head of the radius. Then the second joint that is created by the radius around its proximal end is the radioulnar joint. If we also break down this name, you see that this joint will exist between the radius and also the ulnar, but it is specifically the proximal radioulnar joint. So this is what is arrowed there also in white. So this joint will exist between the radial head and also the radial notch of the ulnar. We'll also be describing this more in detail as we go through with this lecture. So these are the two joints that are formed by the proximal end or proximal region of the radius. Then if you go more distally, we also have two joints. One of these joints that is created is the wrist joint, and this is what is arrowed here in white. This wrist joint is formed between the distal end of the radius and also the carpal bones. Where on this other side, we have the radioulnar joint. Don't forget, we already have a radioulnar joint at the proximal part that we tag the proximal radioulnar joint. And because this is located at the inferior region or distal region, it will be referred to as the distal radioulnar joint. So this joint is seen to exist between the head of the ulnar and also the ulnar notch of the radius. And this is what is arrowed there at this other side. So you see that at the distal end, it is also seen to contribute to the formation of two joints, just as what is projected or presented in its proximal end. So these are the joints that are formed by the radius. Now let's move to the next slide where we'll be describing the different sub-regions of the radius. Because the radius is classified as a long bone, we know that long bone are seen to have two ends. So it is seen to have the proximal end, which is what is carved out here in green. And if you look at the proximal end, you see that it is narrow as we previously described, and also a distal end. And this is where we also have the distal end. And if you look deeply, you see that this distal end is thicker or wider. And we've already described the basis behind this. We say that this distal end will be creating a connection or joint with the carpal bones. And in this regard, it is expected to be wider so as to be able to accommodate these bones. And this is the basis behind this expansion. Then between the two ends, we have the shaft. And this is what is carved out here in blue. So in between the two ends, we have the shaft or the body. So we'll be taking each of these sub-regions one after the other. And it is onto this basis that we'll be highlighting their specific features. First, let's start with the proximal end. The proximal end is also the upper end. And this end is seen to articulate with two bones. It is seen to articulate with the humerus and also the ulna. And because of this, it is going to be presenting features that will be able to allow it to connect with these specific structures. So using this image at this other side, this is where we have the proximal end, of course, creating a connection with the distal end of the humerus and also the proximal end of the ulna. And at this point, it is seen to be creating the humeroradial joint and also the proximal radioulnar joint. We've also described this in our previous slide. So now let's dive into the specific landmarks around this region and also explaining how it is able to connect to these specific regions. First, let's look at the head of the radius. Don't forget that the head of the radius is positioned proximally. And if you look at this image by the side, this is where we have the head of the radius. The head of the radius is disc-shaped appearance, and this is what is projected here in this image. This head is seen to receive the capitulum of the humerus. And if you go back to the structure of the capitulum in our previous lecture on the humerus, if you've not checked up that lecture, please kindly go and do so. We described in that lecture that the capitulum is a rounded edge around the distal region of the humerus. And because of this, the head of the radius is seen to present a concave appearance. This is for it to be able to accommodate the rounded capitulum. If you go back to this image, this is where we have the alignment of the indentation created around the head of the radius. And if you go to this upper region, this is where we have the capitulum here, arrowed in blue. This capitulum, you see that it is a rounded emergence that is seen to be positioned laterally to the trochlea. At this other end, that is arrowed in white, is where we have the trochlea. So this rounded eminence here on this lateral region of the trochlea is what fits into the indentation that is created around the head of the radius. And this is what creates the humeroradial joint, which is the joint between the capitulum of the humerus and also the head of the radius. We've also described this in a previous slide when we tried to highlight the joints formed by the radius. And this is what is projected around this upper edge. Another feature that is seen around the head of the radius is a thicker medial articular region, and this is what fits into the radial notch of the honor. If you go back to this lower image, this is where we have the articular surface, arrowed here in yellow, and at this point we have the connection that it creates with the radial notch of the honor. This is where we have the honor at this medial side. Don't forget that the honor is located medially, while the radius is located laterally. So between the radius and the honor, around the proximal region, there is a joint created, which is referred to as the proximal radioulnar joint. It is also important for us to add that the head of the radius is related to the ulnar ligament. The ulnar ligament is a ligament that is seen to surround the circumference of the head of the radius. And this is what is highlighted here in this image. So it is seen to further help hold the head of the radius with the ulnar. And this is helping to reinforce the proximal radioulnar joint. So at this point, we see that this ligament is related also to the head of the radius. Then if you go more inferiorly, you have the neck. This is where we have the neck of the radius that is arrowed here in green. The neck of the radius is a constriction that is seen just after the head of the radius, and it is seen to be located between the head and also the radial tuberosity, which is the next sub-region we'll be going to after the neck. It is also important for us to include that part of the ulnar ligament also extend to the neck region. Then more inferiorly, we have the radial tuberosity. This is where we have the radial tuberosity here, arrowed in red. It is located as a bony projection around the anterior medial region, and it is specifically seen to receive the tendon of the biceps brachii muscle. Don't forget, in our previous lecture on the muscles of the arm, we described that the biceps brachii is a two-headed muscle that is located superficially in the anterior compartment of the arm region. These two bellies are seen to unite to have a common tendon that will finally be inserted inferiorly on the radial tuberosity. And this is what is projected here in this image. So you see that the proximal region of the radius, we have three distinct features, which include the head, the neck, and the radial tuberosity. And we've tried to describe in details the structures that are related to these specific points. Now let's go to the shaft. The shaft is also referred to as the body, and it is seen between the two ends of the radius. The shaft is seen to enlarge and also curve as it descends inferiorly. And this is basically to accommodate the carpals. Don't forget that the inferior region or the distal end of the radius, it is seen to create the wrist joint. And in creation of this joint, the distal end will be connected to the carpal bones. And for it to be able to accommodate these bones, it is seen to be expanded and also seen to be slightly curved as it descends downwards. So in describing the features of the shaft of the radius, we would be highlighting its borders and also its surfaces. So it's seen to have three borders, and because it has three borders, it is expected to have three surfaces. Don't forget that in our previous lecture on the honor, we described that the honor has three borders and also three surfaces. So also the radius. So now let's dive into the borders. The first border here is the anterior border, and if you look at this image by the side, you see that the anterior border is seen to extend from the anterior side of the radial tuberosity, and you see it crossing down diagonally to the lateral side. If you look at where this arrow is pointing, this is where we have the radial tuberosity, and the anterior side of the radial tuberosity, you have a projection descending downwards, directed laterally. This border is the anterior border. Then if you go behind, we have the posterior border. The posterior border may not be seen in this image because this is the anterior view of the bony compartment of the forearm region, but it is seen to extend posteriorly from the neck of the radius down to the styloid process. Don't forget that the styloid process is located or positioned posterior laterally. So it extends from behind downwards to reach the styloid process. When we have the interosseous border, that can also be referred to as the medial border. This is seen as a sharp projection descending superiorly from the posterior side of the radial tuberosity downwards. And this is what is harrowed there in red. So this is where we have the interosseous border. This interosseous border is related to the interosseous membrane. Don't forget that the interosseous membrane is a fibrous sheet that connects the radius with the ulna. We also described this border in our previous lecture on the ulna. We said that this border in the ulna can also be referred to as the lateral border, while this border in the radius can also be referred to as the medial border. And this is because of the pattern of placement of these two bones around the forearm region. We say that the radius is positioned laterally, while the ulna is positioned medially. So the border that will be connecting these two bones together will also be of opposing name. So this interosseous border for the radius can also be referred to as the medial border. And this is what is harrowed here in red. So these are the three borders of the radius. And as these borders are highlighted, will be used to establish the surfaces. So we have the anterior surface. The anterior surface is going to be seen between the anterior border and the interosseous border. Don't forget that this is where we have the anterior border, and this is where we have the interosseous border that we say can also be referred to as the medial border. So in between these two borders, we then have the anterior surface, and this is what is also harrowed at this point. Then we have the posterior surface, and this surface is expected to be positioned between the interosseous border here and also the posterior border. Don't forget that the posterior border is not seen here in this image. So this surface will be seen at the posterior region, but specifically it will be located between the interosseous border and also the posterior border. Then if you go to the last surface, which is the lateral surface, this surface will be seen between the anterior and also the posterior border. Don't forget that this is the anterior border and the posterior border behind, as we've described. So this lateral border will then be seen between the anterior and also the posterior borders. So it is important that we understand how these borders are created and also how these surfaces would emerge. Now let's go to the distal end, which is the third sub-region of the radius. The distal end of the radius, of course, is the inferior edge, and it is said to be broader. We already described the basis behind this enlargement. Because it is expanded, it is seen to have 5 surfaces. We have the anterior and the posterior surfaces. The anterior surface is at the front, while the posterior surface is behind. Then we have the medial and the lateral surfaces. The medial surface is located medially, while on the lateral side we have the lateral surface, just as the name implies. Then the last surface is the inferior surface, which of course is seen below. So we'll be looking at the specific details of all the surfaces, and this will be used to highlight their features. So for the anterior surface, which of course is located in the anterior side, it is seen to have a lower ridge that creates the attachment site for articular capsule. And this is what is harrowed there at this point. So at this region is seen to be related to the articular capsule. Don't forget that it creates a number of joints at this lower end. So this anterior surface is seen to be creating the platform onto which the articular capsule will be connected to. Then we have the posterior surface behind. The posterior surface behind is solely created for the attachment of muscles and also fibrous shapes. Let's use this upper image to describe the posterior surface. Around the posterior surface, there is a prominent tubercle that is referred to as the listed tubercle. This is the listed tubercle here, highlighted in red. This tubercle is seen as a bony projection that creates the attachment site for a part or sub-region of the extensor retinaculum. We know that the extensor retinaculum is a fibrous band that is seen to help hold the tendon of the extensor muscles in place. Then if you look at both sides of the listed tubercle, we have fossa. So there are depressions created on the medial side and also on the lateral side. On the medial side, it creates connection point for the extensor pollicis longus. While on the lateral side, it creates a connection point for the extensor carpa radialis brevis and also the extensor carpa radialis longus. So it is important that we also highlight this in case we are asked during our examination. Now let's go to the medial surface. The medial surface, we already know that it's directed medially, and of course it is at this point that it will be creating the connection point with the head of the ulna. If you look at this region, this is where we have the medial side, and at this point we have the creation of the distal radial ulnar joint. Don't forget that there is an ulnar notch created on the surface of the radius here, where the head of the ulna will be connected in the creation of the distal radial ulnar joint. So at the medial side is where we have the ulnar notch, which of course creates this important connection site with the ulna. Then if you go more laterally, we have a blunt conical extension or projection that is referred to as the styloid process. This styloid process is an extension that is created around the posterior lateral side of the inferior region of the radius, and specifically it is created for the attachment of muscle and also ligaments. Then if you go inferiorly, we have the inferior surface, which is the last surface. The inferior surface is concave in appearance, and this is what is projected here in this image. So you have on the medial side here, and this other side you have on the lateral side. These two depressions are lined by articular cartilage. This articular cartilage here is preparing this indentation for the formation of joints, and this is why it is lined by this cartilage. So you have articular cartilage lining this indentation, which means that on the medial side, it will be creating a connection site with one of the carpal bones, and specifically it will be creating a connection with the lunate around the medial side. This indentation that is created around the medial side to accommodate the lunate is quadrangular in shape. This quadrangular appearance is for it to be able to accommodate the shape of this bone. If we go more laterally, it is seen to accommodate with the scaphoid. And this indentation that is created on this lateral side is triangular in shape. And it is triangular for it to be able to perfectly accommodate the shape of the scaphoid. So you see that there are different shapes, projected by the two indentation created around the inferior part of the radius. And this shape is for it to perfectly accommodate the shape of the bones that they will be forming connection with. In between these two indentations, we have a ridge, and this is what is heralded at this point. So you see that the inferior surface of the radius is somewhat dramatic, and this presentation is for it to be able to accommodate the carpals. If you look at this upper image, this is where we have the inferior surface here, heralded at this point. At the medial side, you have the lunate. On the lateral side, you have the scaphoid. These two bones are the two carpal bones that will be forming connection with the inferior surface of the radius. And this is what is highlighted here in blue. Now let's go to clinical anatomy. Generally, we know that bones may get fractured. The most common fracture that is seen by the radius is the Cole's fracture. This Cole fracture, we say, is a common radial fracture, and it is seen to occur around the distal region of the radius, which of course is around the wrist region. And it is seen to project a dinner fork appearance. And this is why it is so referred to as a dinner fork deformity. It is seen when impact occurs on an outstretched hand, of course, subjecting the lower end of the radius to fracture. Major symptoms include pains and also swelling. Immobilization with cast or splint can be used for treatment or surgical intervention, as the case may be. Thanks for watching this video. Let's continue to stay glued to the channel.